Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Monday's edition, and we're broadcasting here in Southern California. Happy to have you with us today. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Unfortunately, we have to start off the show with some really tough news. My home birth state of Kentucky, which suffered tornado damage last year, has now suffered some serious flooding. Somewhere in the range of 26 to 30 people have died as a result of the flooding. Pictures emerging from the eastern Kentucky Appalachian area are just devastating. I'm familiar with the area, having grown up in the state. It's a very hilly area, and when you get heavy rains, it tends to segregate within those canyons. And boy, people that didn't have a whole lot are now really hurting. And it's just a heartbreaking scene that is among the most difficult areas of the country, where people live. And now they have this flooding devastation impacting the area. It's just really sad. So our hearts go out to the people in eastern Kentucky, and hopefully all of our viewers can find a web page to go to donate to help those victims. So again, our hearts go out to the people most affected by that. Now, let me shift over a little bit to the economy before I get into the politics of what's going on. There's an indicator, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but it's called the Personal Consumption Expenditure, better known as PCE. And that is the primary Federal Reserve gauge of how they track inflation. And that rose 6.8% last month. It was the biggest 12-month rise since 1982. Now, what does that mean? The headline number last month was 9.1. But the PCE takes into a lot of other factors, and even if you take it on its surface at that high number, the difference between that number and where the Fed funds rate is right now, even after 4 rate increases, the last 2 of which were 75 basis points, there's still a wide gap there, folks. And another popular view that the Fed tends to talk about, and this one I've never been really comfortable with it, but excluding food and energy. Now, I get the same reaction every time. Mark, how do you exclude food and energy? Well, the personal consumption, PCE, increased 4.8%, up 0.1% from May. But it was off the highest increase, which happened earlier this year in February at 5.3. And again, if you look at that 4.8 number, it's roughly double what the current federal funds rate is. So again, wide gap in there between the current interest rates and where inflation and personal consumption expenditures are. What does this tell us? What does this mean? Well, I think you're going to continue to see higher inflation over the next few months. I don't think anything's going to change the trajectory between now and October, November when people vote. And unfortunately, as we've talked to many of our viewers and listeners about, this is effectively a hidden tax on lower and middle income Americans. And it is quite the burden. Now, what's going to happen economically here? Production constraints are going to keep oil prices high for the foreseeable future. There's not a whole lot, given the fact we have Democrats in control of the House, Senate, and Joe Biden in the White House, that we're going to see any changes there. So you have a situation, folks, where, despite the fact interest rates have gone up, demand for petroleum-based products remains high. Couple that with the continued war happening in Ukraine, the insatiable demand for energy from India. China's economy's hit a little bit of a soft spot because of some of their COVID policies. But again, earlier today, coming into the show, oil was trading around $94 a barrel. And at those levels, again, it's not 115 or 120, which we peaked earlier this year, thank God. But when you're sitting here with oil plus or minus near $100 a barrel, that's going to be problematic. What that means is, again, oil goes through every part of the production throughout the entire economy. It's not just the gas you put in your car. Now, we had a chance to take a look at some of the Sunday shows over the weekend. Again, we do this so you don't have to. Folks, they are so biased. It is just absolutely incredible. And here's the thing about it. They will do whatever they can, the mainstream media, to protect the Democrats. It's, again, we as conservatives and Republicans know this, but it became more and more and more obvious. Protecting Joe Biden at all costs. Well, it's not really working, and I'll tell you why. The inflation, folks, is a much, much bigger concern for the Federal Reserve than is a recession. We had the debate last week. Okay, we've had 2 negative quarters of economic growth. Okay, that meets the classic definition of a recession. You had the folks in the Biden administration trying to spin that. No, we're not, because of household savings at a record, 350,000 jobs. I took the side on that. Well, you can make that argument. It's not conclusive, folks. At this point, it's not. And people that claim they know for sure we're in a recession, no, they don't know for sure. And those who say we're not, they don't know for sure either. But just like as we roll the tape, and as it tells us more and more, month by month, this is going to seep into the American public. Wages are not going down. And you speak to employers out there, their biggest input is wages. And folks, with 11 million job openings in the country and only 5.5 million workers to fill it, I don't see anything taking pressure off wages. And it's really interesting to see this too, because 45%, get a load of this, folks, 45% of the American public, they blame Joe Biden and his policies for the problems we're having in this country. There's other people, they blame, the war in Ukraine. They blame the Federal Reserve. But Biden, overwhelmingly, him and his policies and the administration, they are the frequent targets, and the blame, it's sticking to him. One thing this guy is not is the Teflon president. He's the sticky president. Now, let's talk a little bit about that bill, the Inflation Reduction Act that Manchin and Schumer came to an agreement on. We talked about it a little bit last Thursday on the show. It contains provisions in there, and don't kid yourself, folks. There are tax increases in this bill that will hit every American, regardless of income level. Biden has broken his promise not to tax people making under $400,000 a year. If this bill becomes law, he will have broken that promise. There's stepped up enforcement for the IRS. There's something called carried interest. It's a complicated formula. It benefits mainly higher income people, hedge fund managers, private equity firms. But there's other taxation issues in this bill also. And here's the interesting thing. This whole bill was negotiated with the absence of Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. Now, Senator Sinema in the past has opposed increasing taxes, particularly those in the carried interest level, and she's really been against increasing taxes, period. She's not really happy about it. And word has leaked out that she may want to make adjustments in this bill. I still believe at the end of the day it'll pass, because right now she's the only Democrat that could influence the bill. But if she sticks to her guns, allegedly, word coming out from her camp, and this is someone who will read every page of this bill. Unlike those lemmings in the Democratic Party that fall in line, Sinema's not like that. She will, between herself and her aides, they will read every page of this bill. And I'm not trying to prop her up on a pedestal, but in the past she has stuck to her convictions on certain items. So she'll review the bill and we'll see what changes get made, if any. Also, allegedly, she has said that she would give Republicans an opportunity to make amendments. Well, that's typically what you do. But when Democrats like Schumer are trying to ramrod this thing down our throats to get a victory for Biden so the Democrats have something to talk about coming up in the fall campaign, who knows? So Sinema hasn't actually responded yet herself, but some word has leaked out, and reports indicate she does not want that carried interest in the bill, and that she does want to give Republicans an opportunity to make amendments. Now, the Chamber of Commerce and numerous other organizations have spoken out against this bill. And folks, I'm serious. To name this bill, even the name, the Inflation Reduction Act, it's a joke. I mean, are they really serious? That this is not going to have one iota effect on inflation. I mean, Wharton Economics, Wharton University, did a study on this bill. It doesn't even move the needle 0.1%. Think about that for a minute. Doesn't even move the needle. And have you ever in Washington had a bill, think about this, $750 billion of revenue, $450 billion in spending, $300 billion to pay off the deficit over 10 years, $30 billion a year. I don't believe those numbers. I don't think they're correct. And to say that this bill is going to have an effect on inflation, it will not do one iota to affect inflation. Inflation is a fundamental problem of too much demand, not enough supply, therefore prices go up. And coming out of a pandemic with the constraints on oil production that has been in place because of the Biden administration, couple that with the $1.9 trillion unnecessary spending bill passed his first quarter in office, couple that with supply chains, war in Ukraine, a lot of issues factor in Biden's just incomprehensive ability to deal with the issue. And that's where we are right now. Now, let's get back to the president for just a minute, okay? We all know about the economic problems that we're facing. And again, it's not getting any better. Now, gas prices have come down 35 straight days, yes. A lot of oil got released from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's a minor factor that helped those prices go down. But less demand out of China because of COVID lockdowns, that's had an effect on it. And again, when you reach a certain price, near $7 a gallon here in California, I know the average price hit between $5 and $5.25 nationwide. At a certain point, you get demand destruction. But again, when people realize, hey, the inflation is not just gas, but any type of tax increase that comes out of this bill is going to be passed right along to the American public. And with additional IRS enforcement, with additional taxes, that can help slow the economy. Now let's talk about the president's approval rating right now. And we talk about it, every week. Gallup poll currently has Biden, he's at 38%. That's an all-time low for Gallup. You've seen polls earlier last week and the week before where he was in the low to mid-30s. But Gallup, well-respected polling firm, had him at 41% a month ago. Now he's down to 38. That's the bad news for the president. Now let me give you some good news for the president. Good news if you're a Democrat, bad news if you're a Republican. But Scott Rasmussen's poll, and he's been spot on, election after election. I think between Rasmussen and Trafalgar, they have the best polling data in the country. And they've been spot on the last few elections. Rasmussen has Biden a little bit better. He's at 42%. Now you're thinking 41, 42, those are low numbers. 30, he went from 41 to 38 at Gallup. He's at 42 Rasmussen. That's still about a 40% range. Folks, that's better than when he sort of bottomed out in the low to mid 30s. Now, did he get a bump? I don't know. Or is it just maybe those were outlier polls? But the Real Clear Politics average of all polling has him in the upper 30s. So that Rasmussen's a little bit better news for the president. Now, here's one that's all over the map for you. You know, we talk a lot about the generic ballot. And generic ballot's really simple. Would you rather have a Republican or a Democrat in Congress? And we've told you there's generally about a 2% bias against Republicans. So today, that generic ballot has Republicans up by 1%. But really, and again, this is just internal knowledge that I've had over the years, add about 2 points to that because of the bias in polling. So it's really about +3. So what does that mean heading into November? You know, we're less than 100 days now until the midterm elections. And the Democrats are trying to stuff this inflation fighting bill down our throats with all its new taxes and more spending. It's not needed. And folks, let me share this with you. This is one of my favorite things. There's something called the misery index. You're thinking, oh God, Mark, what's that? The misery index. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's a combination of inflation and unemployment. When you take the inflation rate, which right now is running right at 9%, the unemployment 3.6%, okay, so now you're at 12.6%. When it's that high, typically that forecasts a 30 to 40 seat House pickup by the other party, in this case by the Republicans. I'm a little more cautious, and I'll tell you why. I've been saying it consistently month after month. I think we're going to have a pickup in the 15 to 20 range. And you're saying, well, why, Mark? What? You know, the misery index, a lot of other pundits, Newt Gingrich, they're all saying more. We're going to pick up a fair share, but don't kid yourself. I mean, you still have a certain segment of the public that will vote Democrat no matter what. And about 75% of Democrats plan to vote for Democrats. The difference is about 83% of Republicans plan to vote Republicans. So it's a bigger number. But we have so segregated some of these districts in this country, the number of districts that are swing is less. So would I love to see a 30 to 40 seat margin? Absolutely, no question about it. And based on how the Democrats have governed, they deserve that type of what they call ass whooping. But I don't think it's going to be that high. You know, they're likely to pass this bill. They'll get on the money side of the equation. Again, the Democratic Party is made up of a lot of white liberals and billionaires. You know, they used to blame Republicans for that. Not anymore. So money's not going to be a problem for the Democrats. Plus, they've got the media on their side, plus big tech. You know, there's built-in advantages the Democratic Party has. But I think still, with inflation this high, with gasoline prices still high, rent prices high, food prices high, and again, an administration that seems tone deaf to what the American people want, I think there's going to be a turnout at the polls. This race, again, no pun intended, it will be decided by the number of independent voters that side with Republicans over Democrats, because it's just the way it's going to be. And a lot of independents have really soured on the president and his party. And again, like I told you earlier in the show, about 45% of Americans, they blame Biden for this inflation. Now, here's an interesting paradox to all that. You know, we talk about, okay, people are anti-Biden. I got news for you. On the Republican side, get a load of this. I saw this over the weekend. I did my research on it, and it's true. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump are at a 35% approval rating on whether they should run in 2024. Democrats really don't want Biden to run. That's a majority. And Republican side, it's about 50-50 that want Trump, don't want him. But when you add in all Americans who are looking at this race coming up, and you factor in the independent voters, man, only 35, basically 1 out of 3 Americans want to see a redo of Trump-Biden. Democrats don't really want Biden to run. That's been obvious. And they're leaking it out pretty good, too. And Republicans, as we've told you, whether Trump runs or not, we're going to have a deep bench of people running. And I think on both parties. I think there will be 8 to 10 candidates on both sides. Now let's get to America's heartland, because one of the issues we talk about all the time, what do Americans deal with besides the inflation piece and, cramming down this woke education agenda, which, oh, by the way, cost them Virginia governorship. But another big thing that people are just sick up to their ears with is this crime issue. I mean, it's everywhere across the country. No cities are spared, from poor neighborhoods to wealthy neighborhoods, everything in between. Now in Chicago, we talk about that a lot, unfortunately. A veteran prosecutor in Chicago just resigned over the weekend, basically citing zero confidence in District Attorney Kim Foxx. Well, get a load of this, folks. You know how crime is spiking across the country, but in Chicago it's really acute. Crime is at an all-time high in the city of Chicago and surrounding areas. And yet, the number of arrests in the city are at a 20-year low. Makes sense to me. When you have these liberal district attorneys and they don't slap charges on people who commit crimes, that's going to be the outcome from this. And it's just horrific. I mean, they call it's in relation to Baghdad. What do they call it? Shibdad or Bag Chicago, something like that. Chirac. 48 people shot just over the weekend, through Saturday and into Sunday. I mean, it's just astounding. So when you're in a situation, it's not just Chicago, but Chicago's like the poster child all across the country. And people have really had enough of it. They're saying to themselves, listen, we want to protect our families. If people commit a crime, charge them. And this idea of no bail, which has been an adjunct failure in New York City and other areas like Portland, Seattle. No wonder these cities, you go into these cities, they're not anywhere near the vibrancy they used to have. And yet, all these core deep blue cities, that's where you're going to find the Democrats. So, I don't know, folks. We talk about the economic issues, we talk about the taxation issues. Who in their right mind would raise taxes during the middle of a recession or on the edge of recession if we're not there? Only the Democrats. Who would increase spending while inflation's out of control? You would never see this happening with Republicans. But sure enough, here come the Democrats. Manchin, he included this time. And somebody, whether it was Larry Summers, business, industry, somebody got to Joe Manchin. And again, I respect him because he is the most conservative Democrat in the Senate. And, that bill that, if it passes, is dramatically less, than what they wanted to spend. Remember back when we talked about that old Build Back Better, $3 trillion of spending. Well, this one, 90% less than that. So, yeah, hats off to him for that. But this bill didn't have to happen. It's bad legislation. It's bad policy. It's not going to do, for all those climate kooks out there, this is not going to have an effect of a pimple on a bull's ass on the climate change. Why? If you're building coal-fired plants in India, China, and yet we're constraining our energy industry here, literally, folks, yeah, it may be a feel-good story for the greenies. It's not going to make one iota on the climate difference. But they want a virtue signal to their base. Hey, we're trying to do something. All right, now you heard it over the weekend. Biden came down with another case of COVID. He's asymptomatic, meaning he has no symptoms. He's going to isolate for 5 days. I guess they call it a rebound. But he had passed his incubation period. And, the president was double vaccinated and double boosted. So we're happy he got over the first one. See, it sounds like he has no symptoms, asymptomatic on this. So, again, we wish him the best. We want him to be as strong, as he deals with these various issues. We may disagree with him politically, which we do on virtually everything, but on a personal basis, obviously, we want him to do well. Now, let's get to the controversy of the day, or maybe tomorrow. The parlor game being spoken in Washington now is Pelosi's trip. Will she or won't she visit Taiwan on this Asian trip. Well, word leaked out today that she plans to go to Taiwan tomorrow. And this is after stern threats from China that they did not want her to go. The U.S. has a long-standing policy of supporting Taiwan, but China claims Taiwan's part of China. The Chinese government has gone out of their way to basically try to strong-arm the speaker into not going. As of right now, the plan is on Tuesday, she's supposed to be in Taiwan. At least that's what's been leaked out. So, again, we hope she has a good visit. She's going to visit with the president of Taiwan. And folks, don't kid yourself. If China ever decided to invade Taiwan, I hate to tell you, that would make what's going on in Ukraine look like child's play. More on that in future shows. Hopefully we don't have to talk about that. Hopefully nothing comes up on that. Now, tomorrow, real important day, primary day all across America, 4 big states. And they're all pretty much swing states too. Well, 2 swing states, 1 red, 1 blue state. Arizona, clearly a swing state. Primary day tomorrow for Senate, governor. Missouri, big Senate race in Missouri. Michigan, who's going to oppose Gretchen Whitmer, on the Republican side. And Washington State. I think one other state too may have primaries tomorrow. But tomorrow's an important day. Why is it important? Because a lot of Trump-backed candidates are facing non-Trump-backed candidates on our side, on the Republican side of the ledger. So who's going to have more influence in what particular area? Michigan and Arizona are clearly swing states. Missouri, trending red, votes red most of the time. Washington, blue state. But we'll get the results on Wednesday, and we'll talk about them on Wednesday's show. But the big test is really how do Trump's candidates do versus the non-Trump candidates. Then we're going to keep a close eye, on how those primaries turn out. And then finally, we lost a legend over the weekend. The great Bill Russell of the Boston Celtics passed away at the age of 88. Bill Russell was an icon among Americans, not only for what he achieved in sports, but also off the court. Russell won 2 national championships while he played at San Francisco, won a gold medal in the Olympics, and played 13 years with the Boston Celtics, won 11 titles. That's 14 titles out of 16 years, folks. That's just unheard of. Bill Russell suffered through a part of his life when race relations were not what they are in America today. He had to endure some of the many insults that African Americans had to deal with back in the 50s and the 60s. And through it all, Bill Russell stood tall. And the best thing I guess you could say about Bill Russell was he was a winner. 11 NBA titles, 2 in college, 1 in the Olympics. 14 titles, 16 years. That's incredibly impressive. And I looked up a stat on Bill Russell. In deciding game series like Game 5 or Game 7, from if a series was tied 2-2 or 3-3, Bill Russell's teams went 25 wins and no losses in a deciding game. So we'll remember Bill Russell fondly. He was a credit, but not only as an American, but a great basketball credit. And Bill Russell passed at the age of 88. All right, folks, that's it for today. Lots of stuff to uncover. We always cut through the propaganda for you, and there's a lot of propaganda coming out on this inflation bill. But let's keep an eye on it. Let's keep an open mind. Maybe there can be some changes in it. We'll see. We'll keep a close eye tomorrow on how those elections turn out, and we got a busy week ahead of us for sure. All right, thanks for viewing. Thanks for listening today. We'll be back tomorrow. We've got a great guest lineup this week. See you tomorrow. Have a good evening.